My adoptive sister falsely accused me 7 years later. The truth came out, and now they're begging for my help. I grew up in what I always considered a solid family environment in an upper middle. I grew up in a class neighborhood in the Chicago suburbs. On the surface, my parents seemed to have life figured out. My dad was a financial advisor at a prestigious downtown firm, earning enough to provide us with a comfortable life. My mom worked part-time as a real estate agent, though her primary job was what she proudly called maintaining the family image. This meant being actively involved in every possible community organization and ensuring our family looked flawless in Christmas photos. As a child, I was considered the golden boy. I did the right thing, got excellent grades without much effort, was naturally athletic, and remained polite to adults. Sure, I had my fair share of teenage slip-ups, sneaking out for a few beers with friends or attending a party that got out of hand, but I never jeopardized the pristine reputation my mother worked so hard to maintain. When I was 10, my parents adopted Lily, a 3-year-old girl, fulfilling my mother's long-held dream of having a daughter. I still remember the day they brought her home. She was tiny, with big brown eyes that captivated everyone instantly. At first, I acted like a total jerk towards her. Overnight, I was no longer the center of attention. Suddenly, everything revolved around Lily. Her first day of preschool, her dance recitals, or even something as small as her new pink dress. I later realized it was just sibling envy, but at the time, it felt like I had been replaced. As the years passed, our relationship settled into a typical sibling dynamic. We had our fair share of fights, but there were also moments when I genuinely cared for her. I remember when she was in 2nd grade and some brat on the playground kept pulling her hair and pushing her. I made sure he understood that messing with my little sister was a bad idea. By 9th grade, I even walked her to elementary school one morning, just to intimidate another kid who had been teasing her. I also taught her some self-defense basics, how to throw a solid punch, just in case. After all, being a big brother meant protecting her. By the time I reached high school and later college, life seemed to be on the perfect track. By my senior year, I had established myself as the captain of our Division II baseball team, with serious prospects of at least making it to the minor leagues. My 3.85 GPA in business administration, coupled with a minor in finance, put me in a strong position for the future. I had a tight-knit group of friends who were always willing to help, even if it meant answering a call at 3 a.m. Any problems that arose were just further proof of my discipline. I spent countless hours in the gym, training seriously since high school, and by college I was in the best shape of my life. I could bench press 315 pounds for multiple reps, squat 405, and deadlift 495. With broad shoulders, a narrow waist, and defined abs year-round, I was in peak physical condition. I'm not trying to sound arrogant, just painting a picture of where I was at that point in my life. Though I had been in a few serious relationships over the years, none lasted. My main focus was always on my future. My father, who had connections at several top investment firms in Chicago, had already secured me a spot in a management training program at one of the biggest ones. My path was clearly mapped out. Graduate with honors, maybe play baseball for a few more years if the opportunity arose, then settle into a stable career in finance. Eventually, I'd find the right person, get married, and start a family. The classic American dream. Meanwhile, Lily, who was now 15 and a sophomore in high school, had grown into a teenager with artistic and theatrical inclinations. She was constantly involved in school plays and reacted dramatically to just about everything, typical teenage stuff. She had her own group of friends and her own life, but when I came home from college, we still shared occasional dinners, exchanging stories and maintaining what seemed like a normal sibling relationship. However, over time, I started noticing little things, details that, in hindsight, now feel like red flags. There was a hint of envy in her voice whenever my parents boasted about my baseball achievements. She made subtle comments about how easy life had been for me compared to her. And sometimes she would tell elaborate stories about school events that just didn't add up. At the time, I brushed them off as exaggerations, nothing unusual for a teenage girl who loved theater. The turning point came one Tuesday in October of my senior year of college. We had just lost a brutal weekend series, and our coach wasn't about to let it slide. He pushed us to our absolute limit at practice, running us into the ground. I was exhausted, sore, and just wanted to go home and crash. But that night, something happened that changed everything. We had just lost against our biggest rivals, and my body felt wrecked. My legs were like jelly, and my shoulder ached from endless bullpen sessions. That familiar feeling of pushing my body to the extreme and receiving a positive response was bittersweet, rewarding, but exhausting. After showering, I threw on a pair of jeans and a sweatshirt, grabbed my duffel bag, and headed toward my truck, an old F-150 my parents had given me for my 20th birthday. As I reached for my keys, my phone vibrated in my pocket. I pulled it out and froze. 37 missed calls, 54 unread messages, all from family and close friends. My stomach tightened as I scrolled through the texts. How could you? You're dead. What the hell is wrong with you? Panic surged through me. My first thought was that something terrible had happened. Maybe my grandmother or grandfather had passed away. My fingers trembled as I immediately called my father. The moment he answered, his voice sent a chill down my spine. Come home, now, and don't stop anywhere. It was cold, unrecognizable. I had never heard my father sound like that before. Confused and on edge, I hung up and quickly dialed my mother. No answer. I tried my childhood best friend, someone who always picked up. Silence. It felt like I had been marked radioactive, like no one wanted to talk to me. I tossed my phone onto the passenger seat, my stomach churning as I started the 20-minute drive home. NPR played softly on the radio, but the words blended into the chaos in my head. My hands gripped the wheel tightly as my mind raced with possibilities. When I pulled into the driveway, my heart sank. My Uncle Mike's truck was parked in front, along with several other vehicles. That was never a good sign. Uncle Mike, my father's younger brother, was a hot-tempered construction contractor, a man who had never shown much affection toward me. And before I could even step out of my truck, he came charging off the porch like a bull. In one swift motion, he yanked open my truck door, grabbed me by the shirt, and slammed me against the side of his truck. I'm gonna kill you, he roared. His breath reeked of beer, and his bloodshot eyes bulged with fury. I was 22 in peak athletic shape. I could have easily shoved him off, but I didn't. I was too stunned, too blindsided by whatever the hell was happening. Before things escalated further, my father and another Uncle Steve rushed in and tore him away from me. Inside. Now, my father ordered, his voice sharp as a blade. I followed, my legs moving on autopilot, my mind still trying to piece together what I had supposedly done. My father, always composed, was completely unraveling before my eyes. His tone was so severe, so authoritarian, that I almost felt like a prisoner being marched to his sentencing. When we reached the living room, I stopped cold. The room was full. My grandparents, aunts, uncles, close cousins, even family friends. My mother sat on the sofa, eyes red and swollen from crying. And then there was Lily. She was clinging to Grandma, sobbing uncontrollably. As I stepped further into the room, I felt it. The weight, the tension, the suffocating, deathly silence. And in that moment I realized, whatever had happened, whatever I was being accused of, my life was about to change forever. The room was suffocatingly silent. Every pair of eyes burned into me with a mixture of horror and disgust, making my skin crawl. My heart pounded in my chest as I scanned their faces, searching for an explanation. What the hell is going on? I demanded, my voice cracking with confusion. My mother, the woman who had always been my anchor, now looked at me like I was a stranger. No, worse, like I was a monster. Her face twisted with rage and revulsion, emotions I had never seen in her before. How could you? She spat. It's you, your own sister. The words barely registered. My mind reeled, grasping at something, anything, that could explain this nightmare. Then, Lily spoke, calm, staken. She recounted without hesitation that I had been entering her room every night, for years. The accusation hit me like a freight train. The world tilted, my vision blurred, the air in my lungs turned to ice. That's insane, I stammered. I never... But before I could finish, Lily sobbed even louder, her voice shaking with rehearsed terror. You said no one would believe me. You said you'd hurt me if I talked, that it was our secret. Her words echoed through the room, bouncing off the walls and lodging themselves deep in my skull. I shook my head violently. No, I never said that. I never did anything to her. What is going on? But it didn't matter. Chaos erupted around me. Uncle Mike lunged at me, his fists clenched, his face red with rage. I barely had time to react before my father and Uncle Steve grabbed him, holding him back. "Your friend is a cop, you know that?" someone shouted. "You're going to jail, you piece of..." The rest of the words blurred together. My ears rang, my pulse hammered. I turned desperately to my father, the man who had raised me, guided me, shaped my future. He would believe me. He had to. But then I saw it. Something inside him had snapped. My father had always been composed, logical, the embodiment of restraint. But in that moment, his eyes burned with something primal, something I had never seen before. And then he moved. Fast. A right hook. Hard. Precise. The punch landed squarely against my jaw, and my world exploded into a flash of white-hot pain. I stumbled back, crashing to the floor, the taste of blood filling my mouth. And as I lay there, disoriented and gasping for breath, I realized something chilling. I wasn't just being accused. I had already been found guilty. I felt my teeth sink into the inside of my cheek as my father loomed over me, his fist still clenched. "Get your things and get out," he barked. "You are no longer my son." I barely had time to process his words before I noticed the garbage bags piled by the door, my clothes already packed. My mother had done it without hesitation. Dad yanked my wallet from my pocket, stripping out every card with his name on it. Credit cards, health insurance, everything. "Dad, please," I begged, blood dripping from my split lip. "This isn't true. You've known me my whole life. You know I would never..." But my words didn't reach him. He grabbed my shirt, dragged me to the front door, and threw me down the steps like trash. The impact was brutal. Pain exploded in my shoulder, a deep, sharp agony that made me gasp. Later, I would learn it was a partial separation. Then came the garbage bags. My baseball equipment, my entire life tossed at me like I was nothing. "If you ever come near this family again, I'll kill you myself," he spat before slamming the door shut. Silence. I sat on the lawn, dazed, my face throbbing, my shoulder on fire. My neighbors peeked through their windows, whispering, judging. In less than an hour, my life had been destroyed. That night, I parked my truck at the baseball field and just sat there. The same field where I had spent countless hours training, pushing my limits, chasing dreams. Now, it felt foreign, like I didn't belong anywhere anymore. Sleep never came. My mind replayed the nightmare over and over. Lily's voice, my parents' faces, the hatred in their eyes. How could they believe her? At dawn, my jaw was swollen, my shoulder so stiff I could barely lift my arm. Desperate, I called my teammate Ryan. He didn't hesitate. "Come crash on my couch, man. My roommates won't love it, but screw them." For a week, I lived in limbo. I reached out to everyone, grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, people who had known me my entire life. No one answered, except for a single text from my dad. "If you contact us again, I'll file a restraining order. You are dead to us." I stared at the message, my hands shaking. Ryan tried to reason with me. "Dude, you have to go to the police. Report that your dad hit you. Get ahead of this before it gets worse." But I couldn't. Some part of me refused to accept reality. I clung to the desperate hope that my parents would wake up and realize the insanity of it all. And honestly, I was terrified. Terrified that Lily wouldn't back down. That no matter what I said, no one would believe me. 2 weeks later, the final blow landed. An email from the university. My tuition payment was overdue. My parents had canceled it mid-semester. Panicked, I rushed to the financial aid office, pleading for emergency loans. But without a cosigner, I was out of options. With a poor credit history and no cosigner, I had no choice but to reduce my course load to part-time. I needed to work full-time just to afford what little aid I had left. At first, my coach was understanding. He let me stay on the team, but as I started missing more practices due to my new security job at a bar, my participation dwindled. My grades followed suit, falling from Dean's List material to barely scraping by. And then came the rumors. No one called me a predator to my face, but I saw it in their eyes. In the way conversations died the moment I entered a room. In the way classmates shifted away if I sat near them. In the distrustful glances, the forced smiles, the whispered words just out of earshot. 4 months later, the spiral worsened. My truck broke down, cracked engine block. The repair would cost thousands, money I didn't have. I lost the delivery job I'd picked up on top of my security shifts. Then came the eviction notice. I hadn't been able to keep up with rent in the miserable apartment I shared with 2 roommates. Nowhere to go. No one to turn to. I started sleeping in the baseball team's storage shed, using the access code the coach had given me. I showered in the locker rooms, ate 1 meal a day in the cafeteria, stretching what was left of my meal plan. Then came February. Freezing temperatures. That night, wrapped in 3 sweatshirts and a sleeping bag, using my sports bag as a pillow, I lay shivering when the coach found me. His voice was soft, filled with something I hadn't heard in a long time. Genuine concern. "Son, what happened to you?" For the first time, someone listened. I told him everything. The accusation, my parents' reaction, losing my truck, the eviction. He didn't interrupt, didn't accuse me of lying. Just nodded, silent for what felt like forever. "You can stay here until the semester ends. After that, I'll help you find another solution." The next day, he brought me a space heater and an inflatable mattress. Every week, he invited me to dinner at his house. His wife always packed leftovers for me to take. It wasn't much, but it was the first real support I had felt in months. With great effort, I finished the year, barely avoiding academic probation with a 2.1 GPA. The fire for baseball was gone. I quit the team. In a final attempt to help, the coach secured me a summer job at a wilderness program for troubled teens. Maybe it wasn't the future I had planned, but it was a chance to start over. Ironically, Colorado saved me. "You're a predator. We're gonna make sure you never hurt anyone again." I barely had time to react before the first punch landed. Adrenaline surged. I fought back. Hard. Landed a few solid hits, even broke one guy's nose. But it was 3 against 1. They had the element of surprise. I had nothing. By the time it was over, I was barely conscious on the pavement. 3 broken ribs, a fractured orbital bone, a dislocated shoulder, a concussion. And yet, ironically, it was the guy with the broken nose who got scared first. The moment a car turned into the lot, they ran. The driver called an ambulance. 2 nights in the hospital. No insurance. A $77,000 medical bill. No home, no job. The painkillers barely dulled the agony, making it impossible to work. I spent my nights in Walmart parking lots, sleeping in my car, washing up in gas station restrooms, and then one night I broke. The rain poured as I drove. The streets were empty, silent, except for the rhythmic thud of my heartbeat in my ears. I found myself on the outskirts of town, parked at the base of an old bridge. It was high. High enough. I stepped out of my Civic, ribs screaming in protest, and walked to the center of the bridge. Cold rain soaked my clothes, plastering my hair to my forehead. My phone was in my hand. No messages, no missed calls. 3 years of silence. 3 years of exile. No one cared if I lived or died. I gripped the railing, staring at the dark water below. Then, "Hey!" The voice was so loud, so sudden, I almost slipped. My fingers tightened around the wet metal. I turned. An old man, maybe in his 70s, stood a few feet away in the rain, a fishing rod in one hand, his jacket pulled tight against the wind. His eyes met mine, calm, unwavering. "Don't come any closer." I swallowed, my voice barely a rasp. "Go away." He didn't move, didn't flinch, just adjusted his grip on the fishing rod and said, "If you go, I go too. And if you jump, you'll make me responsible in a way." His voice was steady, calm, not pleading, just matter of fact. "It's not your problem," I rasped. "It's mine." The old man took a slow step forward, careful not to startle me. "From the moment I saw you, it became my problem." He wasn't threatening, just present. "My name's Frank, retired Marine. I've seen a lot of men on the edge. What brought you here, son? What put you on the wrong side of this railing?" I wanted to ignore him, wanted to tell him to leave me the hell alone, but something in his eyes, something patient, steady, made me hesitate. And then, despite every instinct telling me to stay silent, I told him everything. The accusations that ruined my life, the whispers that never stopped, the loneliness, the hopelessness. Maybe I talked because I thought I wouldn't be here much longer anyway. Or maybe it was because, in that stranger, I didn't see a monster. I saw a man. A man who, for some reason, reminded me of my grandfather, the only person who might have believed me, if it weren't for his dementia. When I finished, Frank nodded. Just like my old coach used to when I finally got something right. Then he said something I'll never forget. "Son, you've carried this burden long enough. Stop fighting alone, just for one night. Come get something hot to eat, dry off, and sleep in a real bed. Tomorrow, we'll talk with clear heads. I shook my head. Why help someone like me? You barely know me. I was about to. Frank's gaze didn't waver. A man who steps back from the edge has something worth living for, even if he doesn't know it yet. And believe me, if you let me down, I'll know where to find you. I don't know why, but I climbed back over the railing. Maybe I was too tired to argue. Maybe I wanted to believe, just for one night, that I wasn't completely alone. Frank took me to his home, a small but immaculate house where everything had a place. Books lined up with military precision. Shoes perfectly arranged by the door. No clutter, no chaos. He gave me dry clothes, his son's. Died in Afghanistan 10 years ago, he said, setting them down. Then he left me to shower while he cooked. For the first time in years, I slept indoors without feeling like a ghost. The next morning, Frank made breakfast, eggs, bacon, and coffee so strong it could wake the dead. Then he made me an offer. Come work for me. Frank ran a small security company, executive protection, event security, specialized jobs for wealthy clients. Why trust me? I asked. You barely know me. I was about to take my own life. He looked at me like he already had the answer. A man who steps back from the edge has something worth living for, even if he doesn't see it yet. Besides, if you double-cross me, I'll know where to find you. For the next 6 months, I lived in Frank's guest room and worked for his company. 5 a.m. workouts, no drinking on work nights. No excuses. Frank paid my medical bills, dragged me to a doctor, ordered me to repay the help when I could. He was strict but fair. Paid well, taught me how to handle money, how to dress, how to talk to clients, how to stand tall again. And above all, how to believe, even just a little, that I was worth saving. Frank insisted I see a therapist, someone who specialized in PTSD, a Vietnam veteran himself. At first, I resisted. Therapy felt like admitting weakness. But Frank wouldn't take no for an answer. Over time, it helped. Helped me understand that what happened wasn't my fault, that I wasn't broken beyond repair. I saved enough to rent a modest apartment. Small, simple, but mine. A place where I could breathe without feeling like a guest in my own life. I enrolled in community college, studying business management, earned specialized security certifications. Frank became the father figure I never had. He never pushed me to reconnect with my family or clear my name. Some battles aren't worth fighting, he told me. Build a life no one can take away from you. A year later, Frank sent me to handle security at his sister's art gallery opening. Said it was a favor to her. Now, I realize it was something more. Sophie was nothing like I expected. Frank had described her as sharp, independent, capable of holding her own against anyone, and he wasn't wrong. But that wasn't all she was. She was beautiful in an unconventional way, tall, athletic, with piercing green eyes that seemed to read right through me. Her asymmetrical haircut framed her face in a way that made her stand out effortlessly, without needing to be a magazine cover model. At first, we didn't click. She saw me as just the muscle. I assumed she was another arrogant art snob. I overheard her explaining an abstract painting to a potential buyer. When they walked away without purchasing, she rolled her eyes. Not everyone gets it, I murmured, more to myself than her. She turned, scanning me up and down, taking in the security uniform. Security for an event. He looked at me and said, "You're falling in love, and she deserves to know the truth." He was right. So one night, over dinner at my apartment, I told her everything. The ugly, painful truth. I expected her to walk away, to look at me with suspicion, maybe even wonder if Lily hadn't been lying after all. Instead, she reached across the table, took my hand, and said, "Thank you for trusting me. I believe you." 3 simple words. I had only ever heard them from Frank, and they broke me. I sobbed like a child while she held me, letting years of pain and suppression finally surface. 2 years after we met, I proposed. I got down on one knee in the exact spot of our first date, ring in hand, heart pounding. She said yes. Frank had the honor of walking her down the aisle, as her own father had passed years earlier. We bought a small house in a quiet neighborhood. I finished my degree and became a partner in Frank's security firm, expanding from local contracts to regional and eventually national deals. Our reputation was built on professionalism and discretion. Sophie's art career flourished, her work exhibited in major galleries, fetching prices she once only dreamed of. We even talked about starting a family. For the first time in my life, I felt truly happy. The nightmares became less frequent. I could even be around children without panic creeping in. Some old college friends reconnected after hearing bits and pieces of my real story. My past felt distant, like something that had happened to someone else. Still, there were nights I wondered, did my family ever doubt Lily's story? Did they ever regret their decisions? But I had accepted it. That chapter was closed, because now I had a new one. Family. Not the one I was born into, but the one I chose. The people who stood by me, who never wavered. But that sense of security was shattered on a random Tuesday in March. I was in the middle of reviewing security protocols for a high-profile, you were the perfect son, a star athlete, intelligent, everyone adored you. Mom and Dad gave you everything I wanted. I wanted them to love me more, to notice me. She swallowed hard. So I accused you of something I knew would ruin you. The fury inside me surged. I thought they'd just get mad at you, maybe punish you. But then people started asking questions and suddenly it spiraled out of control. And I didn't know how to stop it. I felt like I couldn't breathe. I turned to my parents. And you threw me out without even listening, without proof. My father opened his mouth, his voice cracking. We thought we were protecting her. She was our little girl, and you were our son. Something inside me snapped. My fist slammed against the table. Conversations around us halted. Nearby customers pretended not to listen, but I could feel their eyes, their ears, absorbing every word. To top it all off, I seethed. I wasn't even home that 4th of July weekend. The weekend you claimed everything happened. I was in Denver, playing in a baseball tournament. There were pictures, social media posts. Did you even check them? My mother's hand flew to her mouth. My father paled. But I wasn't done. Do you know what happened after you threw me out? Their silence was my answer. My truck broke down. I lost my apartment. I slept in a goddamn baseball team shed. I was assaulted because people heard the rumors and wanted to teach me a lesson. I almost died from exposure. I swallowed, the weight of it all pressing against my chest. I stood on a bridge, ready to jump, because my own family didn't love me enough to believe me. I pulled out my phone and placed it on the table. A series of photos filled the screen. My swollen black eye, my split lip after a bar fight, my sunken, hollowed-out face from months of homelessness. My hospital records detailing the brutal beating I'd endured. I looked up at them, my voice shaking. I was your son. Sophie's grip on my hand tightened. Sophie squeezed my hand, and Frank placed a firm hand on my shoulder in silent support. Between sobs, my mother pleaded, "We're sorry. We made a terrible mistake. We want to make it right." I laughed, a bitter, humorless sound. "And how exactly do you plan to do that? Will you give me back 7 years of my life? Erase the nightmares? Undo the trauma of being homeless, beaten, and standing on that bridge, ready to jump?" Mom broke down completely, her body shaking with sobs. Dad, looking like he had aged 10 years in mere minutes, spoke in a barely audible voice. "We want you to come home. We want our family back together." I shook my head, my voice firm. "That's not possible. I already have my family." I turned to Sophie and Frank, the only ones who had truly stood by me. Then Lily spoke. Her voice trembled. After I made my statement, everything changed. She explained how my parents had cut her off financially. The BMW they had gifted her at 16, gone. Sold. Meanwhile, I had been homeless, sleeping in my truck. She had to drop out of her expensive private university, forced to work in sales and attend night classes at a community college. Then things got worse. Dad's business collapsed due to bad investments. They had to sell the house and move into a condo. Mom's social reputation crumbled. When the truth came out, Mom, her voice filled with shame, finally admitted, "We need your help, Jake. Your father's business is in trouble. We're about to lose the condo. Lily can't continue her studies. We've sold almost everything." I stared at her in disbelief before laughing bitterly. "Seriously?" I scoffed. "You destroyed my life. You disowned me, left me homeless. And yet, I still managed to build something for myself. And now you expect me to bail you out? Just because we're family?" Dad's voice was weak. "We are family." My answer was immediate. "No, we're not. You made your choice 7 years ago. Now you have to live with the consequences." Lily sobbed. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but Mom and Dad shouldn't have to suffer for my mistake. I met her tear-filled gaze. You're right. They should suffer for their own mistakes. I exhaled, my anger cooling slightly. I forgive you, Lily. You were just a kid who made a terrible decision. But them? I turned to my parents. They were adults. They should have protected both of their children. Instead, they discarded one without hesitation. The weight of my words settled between us. I stood up, pulled out my wallet, and placed money on the table. As we walked to the car, Mom grabbed my arm, sobbing. What can we do? What do you want from us? I stared at her for a long moment before answering. I want you to remember what it feels like to have everything taken away. To feel powerless. To have no one believe in you. I gently pulled my arm away and walked to the car. Frank gave my shoulder a reassuring squeeze. Good boy, son. It's been 2 years since that day. From what I've heard, my parents lost the condo. Dad works in a department store. Mom cleans houses. Lily dropped out of school and moved to another state. Sometimes I think about reaching out to Lily. Sophie believes it might be the final step in my healing, not for them, but for me. Frank reminds me that the choice is mine. He'll support me no matter what. But for now, I'm focused on my real family. Sophie is pregnant with our first child, and we're expanding our security firm into 3 new states. We're building something strong, something unshakable. Edit 1. FAQs. Yes, I considered pressing charges against Lily, but the statute of limitations has expired. No, I don't feel guilty for not helping my parents. They made their bed, and yes, Sophie is doing great with the pregnancy. Thanks for asking. Edit 2.